Good afternoon. Let me introduce Mark Khoury from Lebanon. Mark says, as we have seen so far, these presentations are helping us better understand the challenges that are facing the Urantia Book proclamation to the world. Mark Khoury will now take us on a trip to the Middle East and more specifically to Lebanon. Mark is a Lebanese interior architect who grew in Tyre, Lebanon. He has been a Urantia Book believer and a serious student for almost 10 years now. He has also served as a teacher facilitator in the Urantia Book Internet School for almost 3 years, designing courses for truth seekers from all over the world. Mark would like us to join him in exploring the prospects of disseminating the Urantia Book in his home country of Lebanon, and maybe even to the Middle East, and the complications that are standing in the way. Would you please welcome Mark Khoury?
Thank you. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. Tradition says that God placed his staff on these mountains and gave birth to the cedars of God, which are the Lebanese national emblem you will find on the Lebanese flag. Now, when I was a young boy, my dad used to take us, my brothers and I, to these Roman ruins, and we used to take strolls underneath this triumphal arch. And my dad was a good storyteller. He used to love telling us stories, especially about the past glories of Rome and Phoenicia. And I used to love coming here because I couldn't help but wonder and appreciate that the master himself must have walked on these very stones. And my dad, like any other Lebanese, was very proud of his Phoenician heritage, especially with his Tyrian heritage. He used to say that Tyre was the pearl of Phoenicia, how it made the Phoenicians famous all across the world, thanks to their most famous produce, which was the Tyrian dye, purple dye that was extracted from the murex mollusks. Not only that, but the Phoenicians themselves, they invented the alphabets. So the alphabets that we use today take their origins from the alphabets that the Phoenicians created. They are also thought to have invented the technique of glass making. So you see Phoenicia as an ancient civilization dating back to 2500 BC and even more. Take Byblos, for example. Byblos is 10,000 years old. It is one of the oldest cities on earth and one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities, being continuously inhabited for 5,000 years. So there's a lot to be proud of. Now, where is all this? Let's take a look at the world map, especially at the Mediterranean Sea. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and just right here is Lebanon. As you can see, it's a very tiny country, but there's a common saying in Lebanon. Lebanon might be small in size, but it's huge in cultural value. And that's because it sits at a junction point between the three continents, as you see here, between Europe, Africa, and Asia. So that made it a major melting pot of civilizations. Not only that, but the Phoenicians themselves, they were expert maritime traders, so they used to take produce and export and import produce all across the Mediterranean Sea. Not only produce, but also the culture. So that also helped in enriching Lebanon's culture. Now, I want to take a look at Lebanon's geography for a bit. It's a predominantly mountainous terrain, so without traffic, you can actually get from the beach to the mountains in less than 20 minutes. It's surrounded by Syria to the north and the east, the Mediterranean Sea to the west, and Israel to the south. Jesus himself was here. Paper 156 tells us that he visited Tyre, Sidon, and Beirut. He also, paper 134, tells us that he defeated his planetary adversaries on Mount Hermon, which sits just right here on the borders between Syria and Lebanon. As you can see, it's quite close to the Holy Lands, to Capernaum, Galilee, and Jerusalem. Now, my dad used to ask us, do you know what Lebanon means? And we used to say as kids, well, yeah, that's the name of our country. But in fact, Lebanon is a Phoenician word, and it means white. And that is in reference to the white mountaintops. And there's an even more poetic interpretation that suggests that Lebanon is a compound word composed of Lub and Nan, which is God's heart, or in other words, the heart of God. And that is again in reference to the white mountaintops that pierces the heavens. But I'm not here to talk about Lebanon. I'm here to talk about the possibilities of disseminating the Urantia Book into Lebanon. And to be able to do that, we need to understand and explore who Lebanon is. Now, I want us to imagine that Lebanon is this young boy, that he looks 10 years old, but in fact he's 10,000 years old. And now he looks beautiful and wise, but at the same time there's a certain pain, there's a certain deepness to him. And why is that? Well, Lebanon is a fairly new country. It only gained its independence in 1943, and that was by accident rather than by design, because it was a French zone of influence in World War I. And after the French lost in World War II, the Lebanese decided to seize that opportunity to take their independence, and that's how he gained his independence. Now, Lebanon is quite famous. He was mentioned 71 times in the Bible and 3 times in the Urantia Book. But unfortunately, he ranks at 138 according to the Corruption Index, according to transparency.org. So he's not doing so well, and that pushes almost 50% of the population to immigrate. So a country this old, by normal standards, should be on top of the world. It's 10,000 years old. So how did it end up here? To better understand that, we have to know that Lebanon was colonized by almost 23 empires. So growing up, he had several parents or custodians, beginning with the Phoenicians who gave birth to him, then followed by the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Crusades, the Ottomans, and finally the French before gaining his independence. Now, mind you, these aren't all the empires, but they are the most influential to his current culture today. So I already talked about the Phoenicians a bit. I'm going to talk about the Greeks. So what did the Greeks give Lebanon? Well, they were good, nurturing parents to Lebanon. They gave him, they improved his cultural exchange again because of his geographic location. So people, caravans had to go through here, so his culture improved more. They even improved the alphabets. They took the alphabets that the Phoenicians invented and they developed them into the Greek language. They gave Lebanon the new language. They built the Library of Alexandria, which Jesus and Gain had visited. And they gave us the most important contribution to our civilization is philosophy, giving us some of the most important philosophers like Aristotle and Socrates. Now, almost 270 years later, a giant comes in to snatch Lebanon once again from his parents. And this time I'm talking about the Roman Empire, the largest empire in the ancient world. Now, the Romans, they came, they improved everything with their politics, their administration. They invented concrete, and thanks to that amazing discovery, they were able to create roads, bridges, tunnels, and they connected the entire world. Now, this is very important, and I'll tell you why in a moment. They also brought in the Latin language. So again, they took the Greek alphabets and they developed them further into the Latin language, and they also gave us the Julian calendar. But what is their most important contribution, not only to Lebanon, but to the civilization in general, is that they were so good that this master son, the creator son himself, decided to enact his final bestowal during their period. It wasn't during the Greeks, it wasn't now, it was during their time. So their most important contribution was Christianity. So Christ came to Lebanon, he preached in Lebanon, and the Lebanese became one of the earliest Christians in the world. If you remember, when he visited Phoenicia, he preached to the Canaanite women. And at this point, I have to talk about, just to mention, the Maronite Catholics, which are the dominant Christian sect in Lebanon today. Because it was thanks to the roads and bridges that the Romans built, they gave access to the mountains. And so the Maronites, when they came to exist in AD 500, they were able to flee persecution and take refuge in the Lebanese mountains. And so that was thanks to the Romans. Now, I need to take a breath. Creeping out of the south, there was a huge sandstorm that was about to take everyone by surprise. No one was expecting that. And of course, I'm talking about the Saracens. So the Arabs, they came into the scene. They expand, they take over the world. Because the Romans also, they were weakening, so they were able to conquer and even reach Europe. So their most important contribution was, other than Islamic architecture, especially during their golden age, was advances in medicine, math, and science. But their most important contribution to Lebanon was the Islamic religion and the Arabic language. So by this time, the Lebanese mosaic of cultures was embellished with even more religions, origins, ethnicities, like the Christian Melkites, Jacobians, and Maronites, the Muslim Sunni, Shia, Alawite, and Druze, and even some of the Greeks. And these, they came in from all over the world. They came in from Syria, Arabia, Persia, Egypt, India, and elsewhere. And they were speaking Aramaic, Greek, Latin, Arabic, Turkish, and Persian. If you remember, the master used to speak 3 of these, plus the Hebrew, which is the Aramaic, Greek, and Latin. Now, when the Arabs, by the time the Arabs got to Spain and Europe, the Christians and the Europeans just couldn't sit still. They had to do something. And that's why they decided to launch the Crusades, to take the Holy Lands back. And they succeeded. But now, the good thing that happened during their reign was that they allowed the Christians to gain more power. They allowed also the heterodox Muslim sects, such as the Shia, the Alawites, and the Druze, to also regain their presence because they were oppressed by the Sunni Muslim. Now, okay, by the end of the Crusades, 2 major things happened in Lebanon. The Christians and the Druze settled in Mount Lebanon. It's a small part of Lebanon today. And the hostility and mistrust between the Christians and the Muslims grew larger and larger, and is still existing to this very day, as we all know. So, as we can see, poor young Lebanon didn't have a chance to grow or flourish. He's still oppressed. He's being snatched from one parent to the next, not given a chance to express himself, until the Ottomans took control. And it's because the Ottomans, they divided the empire into small emirates. And presiding over each emirate was an emir, a selected emir from the area, from the emirate itself. And that, in the case of Lebanon, it was a visionary statesperson by the name of Fakhruddin. Now this guy, he was able to, he created a state within which Christian Greeks, Maronites, Muslim Sunni, Shia, Durzi, were able to live in a single state and in a spirit of harmony and solidarity and in perfect symbiosis. And so that gave young Lebanon the first chance of real pseudo-autonomy, so to speak, so at a first chance of self-governance. So this was the first experience of governance for Lebanon. Now, the World War I ensued, the Central Powers lost to the Allied nations, and the French took some of the territories that belonged to the Ottomans, including Lebanon, and that's how the French colonized Lebanon. Now, the thing that the French contributed the most to Lebanon was that they expanded Lebanon to its current borders. So this is Mount Lebanon. This is where the Druze and the Christians first settled. And by the time the French colonized Lebanon, they expanded the borders to what we see now. They also, now this allowed the families that were living here to take part in the political life, such as the Sunni Muslims, the Greek and the Catholic Christians, and the Shia Muslims to take part in the political life of the country. And they also allowed the Christians that were living in Mount Lebanon, who had previous ties to the French, to gain more power. Not only that, they also taught Lebanon a new language, which is the French. They enhanced the infrastructure. They made some political, economic, social, and educational reforms. And we also borrowed their constitution. So World War II ensued, the French weakened, and finally young Lebanon became 18 years old and gained his independence. He snatched his independence away and he became free. Now this enthusiastic young youth decided to take life on, and he succeeded. He managed to create a political system in which that represented 18 different communities. He created an atmosphere of liberty and symbiosis that was quite unique to the Middle East. He also managed to have the highest standard of living in the Middle East during that time. And Lebanon at the time was known for its economic prosperity, openness, tolerance, solidarity, and liberty. So those who wanted to express themselves that couldn't do that in their own country used to come to Lebanon. For example, if you wanted to write a book that your country would ban, they would come to Lebanon to publish it. And so he was doing so well that he was dubbed the Switzerland of the Orient at that time. Now, everything was going perfectly well until that dark day when Lebanon was struck by a terrible disease. And I'm talking about the Civil War. It was a period of devastating warfare between Muslims and Christians. So Christians were killing Muslims, Muslims were killing Christians, even Muslims were killing Muslims and Christians were killing Christians. Unlike the situation in Syria today, all the major powers in the world took part in this struggle, be it directly or indirectly. And it took 15 years of strife until 1990, by international intervention, they decided to put an end to this. That was led by Saudi Arabia and concluded with the Ta'if Agreement. So, after this long history, what did we end up with? Here's the Republic of Lebanon in numbers. Its area is 10,452 kilometers squares, or almost 4,000 square miles. Population of 4.5 million citizens and 1.5 million refugees, mainly Syrian and Palestinian. GDP per capita at $8,500, minimum wage at $450, public debt at $100 billion, literacy rate 94%, religious sects recognized 18. Life expectancy is 76 for males and 79 for females. The capital is Beirut and the largest city. The religions are mainly Islam, Christianity, and other. The currency is the Lebanese pounds and the US dollars. Languages are Arabic, French, English, and Armenian in some close communities. Agriculture are mainly citrus, grapes, tomatoes, and industries are banking, tourism, and food. Now, Lebanon is most famous for his cedars, the quality of his wine, and his exceptional cuisine. So, now we finally get to the bread and butter of this presentation. How can we integrate the Urantia Book to Lebanon? But to do that, we need to know how Lebanon thinks. What's his mentality? How does he react to new ideas? How did it reach me? What are the challenges? And so we're going to get into the psyche of Lebanon now. Before we do that, let's explore its ethnic groups today. So it's composed of 50 to 70% Phoenicians, 20 to 30% Arabs, and 10 to 20% Assyrian, Armenian, Greek, Hebrew, Kurdish, Persian, etc. Now, despite all these different ethnicities, Lebanon still managed to create an almost common culture. It's a culture that has a great deal of respect for tradition and fundamentally conservative, but at the same time, it's eclectic and open-minded. So in other words, you can think about it as having a mix between the two most recent empires, which are the Ottomans and the French. So it's a mix of these two cultures. For example, this isn't a strange sight that you can see on some of the Lebanese beaches. You see a fully veiled woman sitting next to 3 women in bikinis. And so the Lebanese is quite adept at integrating in whatever society you put him in, be it in conservative Saudi Arabia or in most open-minded European nations. He can well integrate because he's exposed to all that. Now, the Urantia Book tells us that the family is the master civilizer. A child learns most of the essentials of life from his family and the neighbors. So, how important is the family to the Lebanese? According to a recent study that was conducted upon the Lebanese individual loyalty tree, it was found that the Lebanese had their most loyalty towards their family members, followed by their religion, political party, Lebanon as a nation, and finally loyal to their ethnic groups. Now, to the Urantia Book, this is good. Like I said, it's essential. The family is important. But at the same time, this can be a double-edged sword. Why is that? Because the act of an individual could impact the reputation of the entire family. For example, if I wanted to come clean about my Urantia Book beliefs, I would be probably perceived as a heretic. My parents would suffer social persecution. Now, mind you, persecution is prohibited by law, but social persecution, so by the immediate social circle, and this isn't good for them. So, for example, if my father owns a business, people won't go to him anymore. So yes, family is important, but at the same time, like I said, this can pose some problems. Now, in terms of the family structures, the families are patriarchal. So the man is king. The good thing is the elders are respected. Now, for example, in Muslim divorce proceedings, the children belong to the father and not to the mother. And this isn't strange, because despite the fact that Lebanon is a secular country, family matters such as marriage, divorce, inheritance, and child custody are still handled by the religious authorities and not by the civil government. So basically, if I wanted to get a divorce, the civil government has nothing to do with it. We would go to a church to get it. Now, although the families are patriarchal in nature, that doesn't mean that the women are without their value. Compared to their immediate neighbors, the Middle Easterns, the value of women in Lebanon is quite high. It's not as high as Western civilizations, but it's quite high. For example, men still earn more. They still get better posts and jobs. And unfortunately, we still have some cases of domestic abuse. For example, not long ago, a man beat his wife to death with a frying pan because he suspected her of infidelity. And the government decided to give him a prison sentence of 5 years. But thanks to women's rights movements, this is no longer accepted. Honor crimes are abolished. It's no longer a thing. So it's safe to say that things are progressing positively in that regard. Now, depending on religion and class, the value of women may vary between both extremes of highly liberal and extremely conservative. But the Lebanese Christians espouse a more egalitarian attitude towards women than their Muslim compatriots. But most educated families have embraced full gender equality. So, as you can see, we're getting deeper and deeper into Lebanon's mentality. We're starting to understand how we react with matters that has to do with family, etc. But now here comes in one of our strongest allies, which is education. Lebanon has one of the strongest educational systems in the Middle East. Our current literacy rate is 94%. Our educational system is divided into basically private and public institutions. Families decide to put their children are more keen to putting their children in private institutions, and they are willing to spend a lot of money on education. I remind you that the minimum wage is $450. That is $5,400 per year, and they still are willing to pay an average this much to educate their children. Now, why is that? Because to the Lebanese, education is extremely important. My dad had to sell 2 pieces of land to educate me and my children, my brothers and sisters. My brother was educated in the UK, and my sister has a PhD from Canada. So they are willing to spend a lot because they believe that education will not only give you a better life, it will also give you more opportunities for a better life abroad, not only security. So education is very important to the Lebanese. Just a quick look at the educational system. It's like most educational systems, primary school, which is mandatory, followed by intermediate and secondary. Now, in the secondary, the students get a choice to pick either scientific or literary or vocational studies. Just to explain it a bit more, so you have the first 12 years that are mandatory. You can either follow the academic course and then go to the labor market, or you can, at any point during your academic career, switch into the vocational studies and then go into the labor market. As to the languages taught, there are 3 languages, Arabic, English, and French. So it's 2 main languages, Arabic English plus French, or Arabic French plus English. And the subjects that are taught are math, physics, biology, chemistry, history, sociology, philosophy, geography, computer sciences, and religion. So the math and sciences are taught in the English or French languages. Only the literary subjects are taught in Arabic language. In terms of higher education, it was found that most Lebanese preferred literary studies than scientific ones. So how important is philosophy in Lebanon? Thankfully, philosophy is not neglected. It is a mandatory subject taught during the secondary educational phase. it basically aims to help the learner in forming a personality that is sound, balanced, and with integrity. Now, what does this mean? It basically means that it helps lessen prejudice and promote openness to others. Some of our most famous philosophers include Gibran Khalil Gibran, Said Al, and Bashar Malik. You might be familiar with the work of Gibran, the Prophet. It's a famous book. It was also made into an animation motion picture. I strongly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. Now, Jesus tells us that work must alternate with play. So how does the Lebanese spend his leisure time? According to a recent study, it was found that they spend most of their time visiting friends and family, again emphasizing that family is the most important thing, followed by reading newspapers and magazines, going to restaurants and bars. Beirut nightlife is quite famous, attending cultural and artistic activities, using the internet, and going to social and student activities. Now, sorry, I forgot to mention, just like most of the world, when they go back to their house at night, they watch the television, they browse the internet, they check their social media platforms, etc. So this isn't to say that they don't spend time on their phones. Okay, so another often quoted passage from the Urantia Book is the one that talks about the real musician, the one that will change the course of history, even the entire world. And there's no reason why such a musician can spring from Lebanon. Take Fayrouz, Take Fayrouz, for example. She's Lebanon's most famous singer, being one of the best international singers in the Middle East. Her prime time was in the 60s and 70s, but her songs are still listened to every morning in Lebanon today. Now, the Lebanese artistic expressions reflect his cultural history. So it is expressed in theater and dance, in his cuisine, in his expression of architecture, and even in fashion. We have two famous international fashion designers like Elie Saab and Zuhair Murad. And the Dabke is the Lebanese national dance. In recognition of all these artistic activities, UNESCO declared Beirut the cultural capital of the Arab world for the year 1999. So, what does the Lebanese speak? The main language, or I should say the official language, is Arabic. So we pray in Arabic. Churches and mosques and religious books are read and prayed in Arabic. We watch the news in Arabic, but French is also a secondary official language, and everyone just knows English. For example, a common greeting in Lebanon is Hi, kifak ça va. Hi is English, kifak is Arabic for how are you, and ça va is French for all goes well. Not only that, but the Lebanese Arabic is quite different than the Arabic of the Middle Eastern countries. Why is that? Because it's scattered with words from English, French, Aramaic, Italian, Turkish, and even Greek. Now, I just want to take a quick look at the political schema of Lebanon today. So, after the civil war, they decided they solved their problems with the Taif Agreement and with the 1943 National Pact. 1943 is the year Lebanon gained its independence. So an important thing to note here is that it's divided equally between Christians and Muslims. The president must be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister must be a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of the parliament must be a Shia Muslim. So, in other words, religion membership is deeply interwoven with politics, social and economic opportunities. So, as you can see, religion is very important to the Lebanese because it opens important posts. And the big posts in the government are divided according to sectarian lines. So it can't all be Christians and can't all be Muslims. It has to be divided according to religion. So how important is religion in Lebanon? Well, all Lebanese pray to Allah, and all atheists deny the existence of Allah. Allah is simply an Arabic word of Aramaic origin that means God. Now, how are the religions divided? It's basically 50% Christian, 45% Muslims, and 5% Druze. Now, the Druze are quite similar to the Muslim, but in the census, that's how they decided to divide them. And we have a small percentage of Jewish people, just under 100 people. And we also have, like I said before, 18 officially recognized religions. Now, recognized means that the state recognizes their presence. But we also have unrecognized religions, such as the Baha'is, Jehovah's Witnesses. We even have Mormons. I didn't know that until I researched for the Urantia book. We have some Buddhism and Hinduism, basically from immigrant workers who come to work here. And we also can't deny the existence of the agnostic and the atheists. So it's safe to say that the religious sects are more than the 18 officially recognized ones. Now, in terms of the most dominant sects, we have the Maronite Catholics, followed by the Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholics, and others such as the Protestants and the Armenian Apostolic. And the Muslims, it's about equally divided between the Sunni and the Shia, and a small percentage of the Druze. Now, again, it's important to note that life in Lebanon is largely divided along sectarian lines. So schools, housing, political parties are generally segregated along religious lines. So, according to a recent survey done on almost 3,000 adults, just to know how important religion is into Lebanon, it was found that religion is very important. How important? 97% said that they believe in God and the soul, and only 3% said that they don't believe. When it comes to place of worship attendance, it was found that 93% of the Christians attended church service at least once a week, and only 25% of the Muslims attended it. When it came to the Druze, it was a 50-50. And it's important to note that the Muslims in Lebanon are less concerned with the global role of Islam compared to elsewhere. So they don't care about national unity with the Arabs or anything like that. As to the Christian-Muslim relationship, it was quite positive, as 80% of the Christians said that they have positive attitudes toward their Muslim compatriots, and 86% of the Muslims said that they have positive attitudes toward the Christians. So although members of the religious groups preferred their neighbors from the same group, they displayed little interest in religious segregation. And to testify to that, the religious leaders in Lebanon are still constantly, periodically have these inter-religious dialogue between the major religions in Lebanon. So they sit together and they discuss these ideas to promote further unity, to the point that they are voting to call Lebanon an official center of religious dialogue to serve the Arab world and Christian-Muslim relations of the world. So, as you can see, Lebanon Lebanon holds all religions. It's safe to pick a religion and live here in Lebanon, as the Constitution says that it protects the freedom to practice all religious rights, provided the public order is not disturbed. And Lebanon has always been a refuge for those fleeing religious intolerance. So, how can the Urantia Book access Lebanon? If we wanted to have the Urantia Book as a recognized religion, we would need a formal recognition by the government. We need to ensure that the principles do not contradict popular values or the Constitution, and we need to ensure that the number of its adherents is enough. Now, this is tough for Lebanon. And now, the good thing is, once it is a recognized religion, it gets tax exemption, and it gets to apply its own religious codes to personal status matters, again, such as marriage, divorce, inheritance, and child custody. But to be realistic, if we want to integrate the Urantia Book, it would have to start as an unrecognized religion. So what can we do? We can own property, we can assemble for worship, and we can publish religious material. When it comes to religious conversions, it is free. Everyone can convert to whatever they want, but in general, it is kept secret, again, to avoid social persecution. As to proselytizing and evangelizing, there are no legal barriers against it, but the clerical establishment strongly discourages such activity. So, what is the best approach to disseminate the book? First of all, we need to recognize that the law is on our side. And the Lebanese individual is religious, but are the Lebanese public ready for this revelation? Now, in my opinion, the Protestants are closer to the beliefs of the Urantia Book than are the Catholics. That's my opinion. And in Lebanon, even the Protestants are still a minority. They are still not that generally accepted, and they've been here for more than 500 years, if not even more. And we have to take into consideration that the Muslims are still on the religion of trust and faith, whereas the Christians are still on the fourth epical revelation of Christianity. So they still need to go to the real life of Jesus and how he lived it, the fifth epical revelation. Now, there's no reason why the Muslims can't just jump to the fifth, but in my opinion, this is how it's going to have to happen. There's also a growing fear that the Muslims will outnumber the Christians exponentially in the future. As to the best approach, the good thing is the Lebanese almost always follow the trends of the West. And so when the Urantia Book, and contrary to public belief, the Lebanese people will have favorable opinions to the American people in general. So when the Urantia Book does take public appeal in the United States, when it's powerful, the Lebanese will most likely follow, and thereby they will transmit that belief to the rest of the Middle East. We can't also neglect the role of the diaspora in bringing in the teachings of the Urantia Book. For example, the way I found the book was through a Lebanese Canadian who got to know it from Canada. She brought it back to Lebanon and she told me about it. So we don't just have to focus on Lebanon. We can just, like we are doing here, presenting the Urantia Book in the rest of the world, and it will surely follow because we have Lebanese in all these places. Now, we can also, like Eugene said, we can do what and Widi said, we can do what the Master did during his sojourn in Rome, and that is knock on the doors and go visit the forward-thinking religious leaders and engage them in discussion. We ask them questions, and then they will eventually ask us questions. But thankfully, we don't have to do literal knocking. We can just access the internet and the social media platforms to do that. We can also, of course, participate in interreligious dialogues, promote book fairs, and this is very important, put the Urantia Book in Lebanese libraries because we do not have books. Now, translation to Arabic would be helpful once the book becomes popular, because the Lebanese doesn't have a problem accessing the English or the French translations at this point. But when it does become popular and services are required, or study groups in other words, it could be helpful to translate it to the Arabic language because, again, prayer is done in the native language. Another thing that can be done is to integrate it into apps that use codes. For example, I use a meditation app that by the end of the meditation session, they give me a quote from a famous source. Now, why the Urantia Book could be one of those famous sources. It's just an idea that came to head. Now, as to the study groups in Lebanon, I have personally posted a study group since 2012, that's 7 years ago, and the number of interested individuals is 0, unfortunately. I've yet to receive a single interest. So I checked my contact. It's not that. But it's also worth mentioning that Lebanon is still the best place to disseminate the Urantia Book to the rest of the Middle East. So once it gets here, it will be the platform, the gateway to disseminate it. Now, when Pope John Paul II visited Lebanon in 1997, he said that Lebanon is not a country, Lebanon is a message. And why is that? Just pause to consider that the Lebanese are the only Arabic-speaking Christian majority in the world. Now, what does the Muslim speak? Arabic. So they are essentially the bridge of Christianity to the Arabic world. In conclusion, I am convinced that in our days, the most effective way to spread the fifth epical revelation is to start with the fourth epical revelation, and that is the real life of teaching and teachings of Jesus, as paper 195 tells us. The hour is striking for a rediscovery of the true and original foundations of present-day distorted and compromised Christianity, the real life and teachings of Jesus. And again, in paper 196, the last paper of the book, tells us that of all human knowledge, that which is of greatest value is to know the religion, the religious life of Jesus and how he lived it. The greatest value. Thank you.
Want some water?
Yeah, please, I want some water.
Yes, right.
Okay, you'll get it. That was a mouthful.
Claire? Questions?
Oh, anybody has a question?
Well, you have to have questions after that beautiful presentation. It's amazing.
Awesome.
Do you want to stop sharing, Mark, and then I'll.
So, Mark, that was absolutely fabulous. Very well done. You put a lot of work into that. I see in the political realm how Muslims and Christians are cooperating and getting together. Are there interfaith councils? Is there a United Religions Initiative cooperation circle there? Are there people who actually are on the ground doing interfaith work?
Yes, actually the religious leaders themselves, especially after the terrorists and all these extreme Muslims, the Lebanese Muslims, they didn't want to get involved with this. They just said, we are not like those, this is not Islam. And so it was strongly encouraged that they do these inter-religious dialogues between the leaders. So the patriarch, the Maronite patriarch and the Muslim sheikh would sit together and they would do this religious dialogues between themselves, not only to defend Islam and promote its message of peace, but to further this unity that Lebanon has always been known for. Lebanon has always been known as a place, like I said, of refuge to those fleeing religious persecution. And it's good to know that the Muslim Lebanese are aware of that. They don't want to group themselves with any radical Muslims or anything. As I showed you before, 86% of them showed apathy and positive attitudes toward their Christian brothers. So there's no tensions when it comes to religions in Lebanon. However, there are political tensions. Like I said, religion is quite interwoven into the political life of the country. And so if tensions exist, they exist between the political parties and the religions they are affiliated to. And that's the only religious tension you would get, but not because of any religious beliefs or anything.
And are the Druze more extreme politically?
The truths?
The Druze?
What do you mean?
D-R-U-Z-E? Druze?
Druze. Well, no, I can't say that they are extreme. Well, of course, you can always find the conservative in any religion, and Lebanon, but it's safe to say that, in my opinion, it's 1% of the whatever religious group they belong to. Extremists and conservatives are very few. And when they do find that, by the way, for example, a few years ago, especially during the uprising of the radical Muslim movements, when the religious sects of the Muslims felt that there were a few cells growing in their community that were thinking radically, they almost immediately talked with the armies and they showed cooperation to uproot them. They didn't want them in their community. They know what they are, they know what they aren't. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and one last question. So I recall, I think, that Israel invaded Lebanon over the issue of harboring Hamas. Is that still an issue, or are there still issues there?
We wanted to avoid that topic because it needs a presentation on its own. But yes, what you're saying is true. Basically, there's a lot of political tension, not just tension, basically war between Lebanon and Israel because of many things. Now, the civil war itself wasn't started because of any religious war between the Lebanese. It was mostly political. it had several reasons that, well, I could tell you in private, but I think it's out of the context of this. Yeah.
Somebody else?
I just wanted to know, out of interest, do the Lebanese see themselves as Arabs, or do you see yourselves as something different?
So if you come to a Lebanese and tell him you're an Arab, 70% of them would be offended because they would tell you, no, I'm Phoenician in origin, I'm not an Arab. Just like I showed you in the ethnicities chart, 50 to 70% are of Phoenician origins and only 20 to 30% are of Arab origins. So it's a good question, thank you.
May I ask you, is it safe personally for you to make this presentation?
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, I can do this presentation and no one would do me any harm. But like I said, if the immediate family members or anyone, Lebanon is a small country, so I try to avoid, like, they told me, what are you going to do in Chicago? Well, for tourism. I'm not going to tell them I came here to do a presentation about Lebanon to the Urantia Book. So, yes, I tread carefully when it comes to these topics because I see no reason why I should share this with anyone. If I sense that this person would be interested in the Urantia Book, then yes, by all means, I would tell him, I'm going there, you should watch me, etc., etc. But I usually tread, like I said, lightly. So, no, they wouldn't persecute me, and they can't harm me. By law, they are forbidden to harm me. But again, I could suffer social persecution. I could be banned. Very extreme conservative circles, very rare, but they are found. So it's not unheard of that some individual got banned because he converted to Christianity, especially in Muslim circles. So yeah, you would suffer that kind of persecution, but not physical persecution. So to answer your question, it is safe, but it depends upon you. What do you want, and are you aware of the consequences? That's all.
You officially belong to what group?
Used to Catholics, Maronites. Well, still, basically.
Another thing.
I want just to tell you one thing, and I wanted to share this, especially for every Urantia Book reader, that I use my integration within the dominant sect in Lebanon to incept the concept of the Urantia Book. What do? So I do, this isn't strange for me. I participate in religious gatherings, I go to spiritual retreats, we read the Word of God, the Bible, and we share our opinions. Now what I do is, when I share my opinion upon a passage, I incept the ideas of the Urantia Book into my opinion. So if I needed to use a source, I would just say, I read it in a book that an interpretation of the word that this and that, and I would incept a concept from the Urantia Book. So what we can do is, within our circles, we can promote the teachings of the Urantia Book without mentioning the Urantia Book. Now, what would we be doing? We would raising their consciousness. We would raising their consciousness higher. They would probably ask more questions and hopefully ask me questions of where did you learn this, and I would lead them to the book. So again, it's not always necessary to start apart. We can integrate ourselves in them and start from within. Just my 2 cents on the issue.
Thank you. I just mentioned that, as far as I know, there is some kind of Arabic translations already.
I've taken a look at it, and like I said, honestly, at this point, there's no point. I mean, there isn't a great number of Urantia Book leaders. Aside from myself, I know 5 other individuals, so that's 6 individuals, my fiancé included. But like I said, the language is not the issue here. The millennials, especially the millennials, they can access the English and the French translations without any problem. Now, when it comes to the baby boomers, yes, we might need the Arabic translation, but let's be realistic. Baby boomers aren't keen on changing their religious beliefs. At this point, they are, their beliefs are integrated and they are they're not so keen on changing them. So no, at this point it's not really. I don't see why it's necessary.
Oh, thank you so much, Mike, for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I like the graphic.
You like the pictures?
The graphic, very nice.
Thank you.
The last where you got 0, what was that? Yes, study groups.
Participants in particular.
Given your approach to the way you're handling the Urantia Book within yourself and maybe people around you,
Okay.
and the fear you have against the society somehow.
I wouldn't call it a fear, but yeah.
I'm just saying, okay. Given that situation you're going through, let me say, don't you think that maybe there are other readers who have the same, say that you get 0?
I suspected that. That's why I contacted Chris. I asked him just today, did you receive any kind of message from a reader in Lebanon? And he said, no, you're just the only one. So I don't know, maybe. I mean, I've put myself out there, just to get a message or something, but who knows? I would think that they would at least order a book, but apparently no one did, so yeah.
I have 2 questions. The first is, what is the difference between the Catholic Masonites and the Catholic
The Catholics. Well, the Maronites, they follow Saint Maroon, which was a priest that emerged from Syria, and well, it's I wouldn't call it esoteric, but they're more traditional. So their prayers, they include the Aramaic language in the service. So it's just a branch of Catholicism, but they do follow the Pope. They are not allowed to go astray. I mean, the bases are there. It's just the small details in the worship and the language and some of the ceremonies, but not the core message. But I have to say that the Catholics in Lebanon in general, and even the Maronites, I hear opinions about the Catholics, how they are, well, closed-minded, or they resort to almost superstitious beliefs. But in Lebanon, especially since Pope John Paul II, and thanks to his youth movement, if you've heard about it, so he promoted this openness towards the youth. And the Lebanese clerical priests, and I've seen it, I've experienced it myself, they are being clever about it. Their services are open, they involve music, they make it light, their message, even their sermons. So I wouldn't entirely agree with what I hear. I mean, a certain priest in Lebanon, the one that I follow basically, was trying to preach to the public. He says that the Christians need a new evangelism of Christianity because they are stuck in traditional religion, and so they need to learn the true message of Christ. And he's basically trying to uproot the superstitious beliefs from the Christian public and tell them that holy water isn't about holy water. It's a symbolism. The Virgin Mary isn't an idol. She's an important personality, but you don't need the Virgin Mary when you have Jesus, etc. And even him, I mean, he's a Catholic priest. Even he was persecuted socially again. So as you can see, people are still entrenched in the traditional Christianity. They are not really ready for the fifth optical revelation. I tried myself to, like what happened with you, I tried to approach the book to my individual, the third circle, you call it, the friends and family. Friends. Then I received the same feedback. I mean, one emphatically told me, no, I don't want to hear about this. Keep this book away from me. They just wasn't ready. They didn't want to change what they believe in. They are not dissatisfied. And you have to be a truth seeker to find the Urantia Book. So I don't think the Lebanese need it anyway. That's not their primary concern at this point. They are religious.
I have a second question. You mentioned that the Muslim population at some point will outnumber the Christian population.
Yeah.
Do you think is that because they have more children? Because that's the fear also, is fear because of the situation that has been happening in Europe, and they say at some point in all the world Muslims
heard
are really
those.
going to outnumber.
Yeah, I mean, even the census, even the percentages I showed you, these are estimates. We only had one census, and it was in 1932, so we don't have any official numbers. This was a close estimate. They like to keep it that way because of the political situation. Again, the parliament is divided 50-50 between Christian and Muslim. That balance is extremely important. But in reality, I would venture and say it's 60% Muslim at this point and 40% Christian. It's not 50-50. They are growing. And like you said, not only do Muslims bring more children, but the Christians themselves, they don't bring that many children. So two parents would bring one child. They're not even maintaining the same number. It's if two bring two, you're maintaining the same number. If two bring one, it's decreasing by half. And not only that, but as I showed you, $100 billion in debt. So the economical situation in Lebanon is horrific at the moment. It's mainly because of many things, but lastly it was because of the war in Syria, the refugees that flooded. Lebanon is a small nation. It can't handle that many refugees. Lebanese are losing jobs, etc., etc. And so the Lebanese are immigrating. The educated ones, I told you, I'm immigrating to Canada. I lost my job just last month. I had to immigrate. So this is what's happening. I mean, I consider myself one of the educated people. And like I said, it's 94%. So I'm not unique. We have a lot of architects, we have a lot of doctors, we have a lot of lawyers, but so few jobs. So people are forced to immigrate. And it has always been that way with Lebanon, especially in Phoenicia. If you remember, they are a nation that lives on the coast. They venture to the rest of the world. They are adventurers. They go to the rest of Europe, etc. So I hope that answers your question. You're welcome.
I wanted to ask you about the Arabic translation, because I think it is very important to reach Arabia in general, not just Lebanon, to have a very good quality Arabic translation.
I've never thought about it, that the Urantia Book could be integrated into the Arabian libraries. Now, especially in United Arab of Emirates and Qatar. They are, I mean, these two, I've put my eyes on them. They are trying to evolve. We all know about Dubai, and they're really trying. They're doing everything they want to put their city on the map. They're being open. They're building churches, and so is the case with Qatar. They are progressing. Now, they could be potential candidates, yes. At this point, they don't have the dominant Christian presence in their nations, so I don't know how would that go, but it's worth a try. If we translated it to Arabic, place it in their libraries, who knows. But I would really want to see it in Lebanese libraries, because just yesterday I was talking to Bob, and he told me that's how he was introduced to the book. He just walked into a store, saw the book, what is a Urantia? He grabbed it and bought it, and that was it. No friend giving him the message, no convincing of any sort. It was that simple, and so that opened my eyes. Yeah, this could be a possibility. Someone walking into the library, looking at the aisle of spirituality books, finding the Urantia book, yeah, why not? And that's it. And Lebanese are readers. Yeah, our libraries are filled. 70% of the books are in English and French. Only 20% or 30% are in Arabic. So again, when the people that like to read, they like to read in foreign languages.
Okay, one more question. Your conclusion at the end was that showing or demonstrating or exemplifying the real teachings of Jesus is an approach that you would like to take. Can you elaborate a little bit more on?
Well, think about it. What is the biggest part in the Urantia book? It's part 4. Yeah, the teaching and life of Jesus. This is the part that people relate to emotionally the most. I mean, yeah, I like the knowledge about the 7 super universes. The Urantia worlds are quite cool, to be honest. Adam and Eve and the Lucifer rebellion, yes, very important. But what I remember the most, if I wanted to recall a passage, 90% of the time I remember what Jesus said on a certain situation. In my daily life, if I wanted to know how to react to a certain situation, I wouldn't recall paper 35 or 36. I would recall the Jesus papers. What would Jesus do in this situation? Oh yes, in Rome he did this, this and that. Same thing with how we disseminate the book. That's what I thought. How would I do it? Well, Jesus prepared the way for Paul. He went to Rome, he talked with the religious leaders, he uplifted their consciousness. When Paul came in, it was easy for him. So I think that's what should be done in Lebanon. We should prepare the way for that time when the revelation will finally flourish in that area. And that's why I thought we should do that. We should focus on that.
I completely agree. I just want to add another question is,
Of course.
how would you, I mean, Jesus is one of the prophets in the sequence in Islam, Muhammad being the last one and the most important one, and the founder of Islam. But how would you tailor or flavor the life and teachings of Jesus for Muslims?
Thank you for asking that. I've been through that situation, and I wanted to share that, and thank you. So what I did with Muslims basically believe that God, well, if you tell them that Jesus is the Son of God, they would shut you off immediately. No, we don't want to hear about it. There's only one God. It's like what you did in your presentation, Woody. But what I do is that I tell them, well, I know that God, when He created man, according to Islam, He made man out of clay, and then He breathed life into him. So in essence, you are the spiritual child of God. That breath that He gave you, He was the source, so you are His child. And that's the message of Christianity. Jesus didn't say He was the physical child of God. So in Arabic, it's the word wulida, which means give birth to. And it's related to when a woman gives birth to a child. And so I told them, don't think about it that way. Think about it that God gave you His Spirit. You are His son, and they would accept this message. A second thing I would say is that in Islam, they have, I think, 99 names for the word God. He's merciful, etc., etc. But they don't have love. I noticed that. I read them, the 99, love wasn't there. And so when I go to a Muslim, I tell him, you know that there's 99 names for the word God, but love isn't one of them? Do you know why? He says, why? I tell him, because do you know what the Christians call God? He said, no. I tell him, love, unity. You need to complement each other. They are open to that. And it's very important because the Urantia Book tells us that we have to, from my discussions with other Urantia Book readers on online platforms, I discovered that according to most of them, the best approach is to live it. And Jesus even tells us that the measure of your relatedness to truth or something like that is when people come to you with a message, not when you go to them to the message. So in my work environment, that's what I do. Whenever a topic emerges, I just incept these messages, and sometimes they come and ask me, and that have been that have shown fruits. Not necessarily asking for the book, but they have raised their consciousness. So thank you for the question.
I totally understand what you're saying about maybe starting from the Jesus papers, but I do ask whether there is a tension between the way the revelators like us to approach the revelation. It would be simpler for our minds to approach it from the more simple upwards, but they like us to come from the more complex downwards because of the pattern created by the sources and centers and by paradise and go downwards. Okay. I just wondered how you kind of feel about that.
I would like you to pay attention to the fact that, yes, the Urantia Book begins with up to down. And what are the first 5 papers in the Urantia Book? The fatherhood of God. So the common source. They start with that. And yes, I was thinking about it yesterday. If a Muslim was to grab a book of the Urantia Book, what would he read first? He would read, yes, In the Minds of a Martyr of Morantia, etc. And then he would go to the fatherhood of God, the unity, the one fact that every religion agrees upon. There's one God. And so, yes, that could have some merit. But, I don't know. I think on a personal level, he needs to learn that he's a child of God first and not a slave of God. He needs, because, like Woody mentioned, they are really jailed in their traditions. It's a mechanical relationship with God. It's not a personal relationship with God. And I think the fact that when they do know that they are children of God, that would immediately create a link between them and that personal God.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
From what you've explained, I get the sense that you're trying to say that we should start with the known. Right?
With the?
With the known, what they know.
Yes.
Into the unknown.
Yes.
To the mysterious.
Well, remember that Jesus, when he told us to teach them, he said, bring yourself to their level and bring them up. Remember, when you were talking to people, I think he says that in that sense. So try to bring yourself to their level, speak their language, and then lift them up. So that's the essence of what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay.
So I think I understand you to be saying that what the approach is the true life and teachings of Jesus, where Jesus' life was about revealing the Father as a Father, and the kingdom of God really as the family of God. And that's what you're saying when you say that Muslims have a mechanical relationship, almost a servant relationship with God, and you're trying to elevate them like Jesus did in his day to the concept of dignity of being a divine son.
Just like Widit said in his presentation, Muslims are very similar to Jewish. He placed them, if you remember, on the same level, on the same plane, and because their relationship to God is quite similar. Okay, God is over there, he's a bookkeeper, he's not personal. And that's what they, in my experience, when I talk to Muslims, that's what they're missing. When you tell them that you are a child of God, no, what do you mean I'm a child of God? Yes, you are a child of God. That message on itself is very, very powerful. Just this word, God is your Father. I mean, it's transformative. Jesus knew what he was doing. Remember, he told the he told the apostles, your main message is this, the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. That was it. And he started with 12. Look at us now.
And that emphasizes the love.
Exactly.
Because of
the love. Love is a personal relationship. Obedience to law is not. It's a mechanical relationship to God. They have to pray 5 times during set periods of time during the day. They have to say certain words. They have to clean themselves in a certain way. If they don't do it properly, they have to do it again. It's very mechanical. So they lack that personal touch. They want to be loved. That's what I experienced.
That's a good point.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and I think your experiences are not unique. We all have that, experience where you have your circle of people and they're just not interested. I've had people run away from me with the book too.
Yeah.
But I loved what you said about when you talk about the teachings, but you don't use the Urantia vocabulary. And I tell people who call here all the time, in your situation, you will get so much further with so many people if you just leave the vocabulary out of it. And you can, deep, profound conversations, and then maybe they will come back for more.
Exactly.
And I think it's just so important that we always remember that this book was given to us early, and it's for that next age that we're quivering on the brink of who knows how long a quiver is. And that we just, be patient with how we introduce. Jesus never disrespected truth by giving too much to someone. Well, they would reject it.
Exactly.
And with this book, it's, a lot of us, I think it's better not to know about it than to think there's this weird book that they're all into. But, but on the other hand, they can think, wow, you have the most beautiful philosophy, let's talk forever.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Yeah, you have a point. It does depend on the situation. That's where wisdom comes in. Jesus tells us, be as wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves. So we need to exercise that.
Just a little comment about the mechanical aspects of some traditional religions. I'm not an observing Jewish person, so I don't do all those rituals. but I asked this question several times of people who do practice it, and some of them said, yes, there are those people who do things mechanically. But at the same time, for instance, in a Jewish home, every door has a mezuzah, and you're supposed to touch it and kiss your lips every time you go and in and out, and it's actually written in the Bible. What I'm trying to say is that if you actually remember God every time you go in and out of the door, I think that was probably among the most potent spiritual practices on the planet. If every time we go in and out of a door, we will remember God and remember we're children of God, which is many times a day, that's probably many times more than we actually get to do it when we're not communing, when we're not doing something specific.
When one of the apostles asked Jesus this question about religion, and he basically says, even the most traditional religion, traditional prayer, will open the small channel to connection. But I mean, yes, you are opening a very tiny channel, but you could be opening a huge channel. That's the difference. I'm not saying that this mechanical relationship has no merits at all. No, it's better than not having a relationship, obviously. But I'm just describing what I see. And to be honest, it's a religion of fear. I'm talking about the Muslims. They fear that if they don't obey these rules, God will put them in hell. They will burn. They will, so they have to do it. They do it out of fear more than out of love or respect. I'm not saying that they don't respect or love their God, but fear exists. They don't have the option not to do it if they don't feel like it.
I just want to say, I'm not saying all the things you said are not right. Just what I took from this talk with this person is that it is really very personal. If that specific person I'm talking to really takes those commandments of the Judaism or Islam as an opportunity to be present in the moment he's doing them, it's very, very valuable. So it's really for me to look at that person that I'm talking to and judge or evaluate whether this person takes those commandments as an opportunity to commune, or they do it mechanically, and not generalize on their entire faith, because I don't really know. And at the same time, your observations as a generalization, they seem to have a lot of truth in them.
I like to take what they believe and build on that. Whatever it was, you know, you believe in that, okay, let's start from here. The Urantia Book is all inclusive. Eugene would like to ask.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if you said this, because sometimes I lose consciousness here. But anyway, the Maronite Christian, is that, what is the lineage on that in terms of the apostles? Who propagated?
Well, I don't know, but I know that it started with a certain saint. His name is Saint Maroon, and he started from Syria. He's pretty close to the teachings of August. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think the father of priests. What was his name? Augustine. Sorry. Yeah. So they started from that. They added a bit of their ritual, their ceremonies. They used the Aramaic language in some of their rituals and ceremonies, but the core beliefs are Catholic. They follow what the Pope says. They have a decree. Etc. So yeah.
Okay. But is it only in Lebanon?
Yeah. I mean, they have like so because there are diaspora and everywhere. Wherever there are Lebanese immigrants, they would build a church there to accommodate their congregation. But yeah.
Another thing also I would like to comment that most of the traditional religion that sprang from the Abrahamic, like Jewish, Christian even, and Muslim, is really out of fear. I mean, because I can relate that to a lot of Christian. The reason why they are doing this is because they're really fierce. So I think there's a lot of things that needs to be propagated, and I think we really haven't get the essence of Jesus' teachings yet, to the utmost.
The real life of Jesus. And how he lived it.
And this is where the fifth epochal revelation comes in.
Yep.
Right.
I have a rather random question, Mark. As
Yep.
I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about ritual
Okay.
and the use of ritual and the understanding of ritual in the context of someone's belief system. And I'm wondering if there are ways to connect with the Muslims or other religions through ritual and through understanding their rituals.
Well, you can always connect with someone if you understand him, but through their rituals, what I did was, for example, the Muslims, if you're familiar with their way of prayer, there's a lot of movement, they kneel, etc. So when I was in discussion with a Muslim, I told him, you know what are the benefits of this? He said, what? I said, are you familiar with yoga? He said, yeah, a bit. I told him, that's what you're basically doing. You're opening the movement of the body, you're opening your spiritual channels or whatever. And he really liked the idea. So yes, I tried to, and through the yoga, I would lead him to meditation. And so that's my personal experience. That's what I tried to do. I told him it's quite similar to that, so why not? And he was really open to the idea. He liked it. So yeah, maybe. It's a good question. Thank you.
I have experience in the spreading gospel of Jesus, because in the several years I have promised myself that I will only talk about gospel of Jesus. I will not talk about anything else. I will talk about this gospel. Then the gospel of Jesus is connected directly with our action. So first we love people, and then we can tell people, God loves you. It's so easy like that.
Yep. Everyone loves love.
God loves you so much.
Yeah.
He is your Father. Directly like that. It is, yes, it makes deep.
You emotionally connect with him, and that's more important than the mind.
We even don't. We don't even tell people I'm the follower of Jesus. No, I'm become Jesus himself.
Yes. And your actions, yeah.
Yes.
You don't have to say Jesus said. In my experience, whenever someone says, "Well, Jesus says this, and that," don't care what he says. If you told him you can't worship two gods, money and God, they would love that fact. But if you tell them Jesus said, it's over. They will not hear it. Yeah, whatever you say next, they will not hear it. So sometimes you have to be clever about these things.
Yeah.
Know your audience, exactly.
You mentioned these 99 words, names of the God.
Right.
Is there a name like a freedom?
I would have to check. I honestly didn't memorize them.
Because.
But from the top of my head, I would say no. Yeah.
Because
they're more adjectives than names. So it's like mercy.
Because if they have fear of God, and you say fear is the antipode of the love.
Right.
So if you have a love, you don't have a fear. So love is like a,
the cure.
they will be free if
Yep.
they
Yep, yep.
if they have a word love, according to Allah. Allah is love, so they understand that I must not fear Him.
It
so
challenges them.
I must,
it challenges
yes, it challenges
them.
because why I will be fear to not to follow all these rules. So maybe I cannot do all this stuff because God is love. He
Right.
loves me anyway.
Speaking of freedom, I once had an interesting discussion with a Muslim who said that she loves reading books. And I remember telling her that, okay, you love reading book, but you are still jailed. I'm coining the expression. You're still prisoned with one book. You accept that this book is true, infallible, it's the book, and that is the thing that's hindering your freedom. And so that's another thing that we can do, is that just tell them, okay, but why not read the Bible, for example? Just watch it as a movie, as a story. It's, if I told you to watch Lord of the Rings, you wouldn't necessarily believe in their religions or whatever. Just treat it that way. At least they will hear the message. They will hear that love your enemies. What's the point of loving your loved ones? Everyone does that, etc., etc. So, yeah.
I have a friend who's a Sufi, and he says actually they do have the word love.
And the 99 names?
In it is, he says it's not just another name of God, it is the 99 names.
Well, I'm not a sheikh,
but that's what he shared with me.
I mean, I've checked them. It's not there. The word emphatically, maybe it's an interpretation. Maybe he wanted to, like, yes, but they all embrace love. Okay,
right.
But it's not written there. And I read Arabic. I know.
Right.
That, so.
Right. But somebody like Rumi, who says, "My religion is love."
Who is he?
Rumi. He's the world's greatest poet. He's from Turkey.
Okay.
You know Rumi?
Sorry, no.
You will soon. I'm going to send you his book.
Okay. So yeah, sorry. What does he say?
My religion is love.
That's cool.
Rumi was a Sufi.
Oh, okay.
Sufi master.
Yeah, well, Sufis are quite different than the rest of the Muslims. It's the esoteric branch of Islam, and so they are basically more open to new ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really great discussion, and some of my thoughts are kind of about the first page that I believe Marta read to us about the expanding cosmic consciousness and spiritual perception. And kind of unpacking those maybe would be really helpful in terms of, thinking about how we present the Urantia book to others. And I do understand a person-to-person, which is more on the spiritual perception, but maybe it is the cosmic consciousness that you're really talking about with God the Father. They don't have the consciousness of God. But anyway, I think that's a really great discussion. What I just wanted to do is read you a little bit from our history document, because it might be interesting. These are kind of accounts from people who were around at that time. And it starts with the unexpected gift. The biggest surprise was the Jesus papers. We never expected to get a whole new story of Jesus' life. This was a big shock. Although there'd been information about Jesus presented in the first 57 papers, there was little detail provided. There had been a number of questions posed by the forum having to do with the life and teachings of Jesus, but no one anticipated the Jesus papers. The Revelatory Commission had entertained questions from the forum about Jesus, but had not responded in any substantial manner. One forum member wrote, "In response to our questions about this, the midwayers told the contact commissioners that they were not certain about their authority on this subject, and therefore started a process of judicial determination. And until such a time as they were to get an answer from the local universe courts, until such time as they were free to deliver the rest of the information that they had prepared about Christ Michael." And I only mention that because it almost seems like the revelation, well, we know the Jesus Papers came a year after the 1934, but I only mention that because in a sense it's like this contradistinction between almost two parts of the revelation. They wouldn't touch the Jesus kind of stuff earlier on, but then came a year later, the part 4. And I just wanted to make that comment because it adds to kind of the whole idea of, do we have kind of the 5th and the 4th, and do they both make up the 5th, or is the 4th kind of a precursor to the 5th? And I have no answer to that, but just listening to you all, I just couldn't help but thinking about the consequences of all of these issues.
In my opinion, I love the first 3 parts. I wanted them. Like I said, the Lucifer Rebellion is one of the most important papers in the book. Adam and Eve is also tremendously important. So the Urantia Book is a whole unit. I was talking to Kat, we're both architects. I told him it's an architectural work, the book. Not a single word was placed by accident or randomly. Everything was studied very carefully. And like someone mentioned earlier, it's a top-down revelation. They started from the top to the bottom. Now, would the real teaching of Jesus suffice? Maybe, but I personally would love to have what they presented us. I love the whole revelation about the universe. I needed them. I feel that I needed them. But that doesn't mean that everyone needs them. Some people are content with what they have. I personally needed them. I asked for them and God responded. As simple as that. So I trust in the wisdom of the revelators, and especially the Ancients of Days, like God just told us. When they asked the Ancients of Days, they not only approved it, they encouraged it. So yes, I think they form a unit. They're both important. No, we should not separate them. But we can, it's just a matter of how you approach a new reader. That's all.
Well, I just like to add something to your comment there, and which I think is at the very beginning, my impression is a personal impression. Revelators were not willing really to talk about Jesus because Jesus was the 4th revelation. But also they said the book was advanced for this era. We are not prepared for it yet. It is becoming in advance for preparing for the right momentum, right? So, and one of the purposes of revelation is to cut out misunderstandings and problems that we had with prior revelations, just to and also with the evolutionary religion. So they want to try to put together the things and make clear where the truth is. So I think at the end they agreed to insert the Jesus part on the book because we are on a transition period and maybe clearing up some of the misunderstandings we have about Jesus was very, very productive and very good for the current population. But the revelation itself at the very beginning was not, well, the revelation, the revelators tells us that. It was not planned that way. So, and thanks our intermediaries that they did so good job to introduce it there.
Well, I trust the Supreme. So.
Yeah.
So I think we finished this session. I just would like to thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you for
Mark.
having me. It's been a pleasure.